Hey, welcome to Socialism for All. Today's date is August 14, 2021, and this weekend we are going to do some Hanging with the Sock Dem Gang clips in which I watch and criticize social democrats. So today we're starting with David Pakman, one of my least favorite of this whole bunch. I think he's sort of farthest to the right. For these clips, I go to the Secular Talk channel run by Kyle Kulinski, and I click on the channels tab, and he's promoting about 36 different other channels: Kim Iverson, David Pakman, Jimmy Dore, Tim Black, people like that. And some of these people are, okay. They're not socialists, but honestly, on any random other take, I may agree with them more. I may agree with them less. But anyway, Pakman is definitely on my shit list. I recently did a couple of criticisms of him, including his Why I'm Not a Socialist video. Well, I guess he just can't get enough punishment because he just did another video that I think is along the same lines, called Why Did Socialism Get So Popular Suddenly? Or something to that effect. So I haven't seen this before. Let's watch it cold, and I'll give you my Marxist take on what is most likely some social democratic bullshit. Here we go.
Why don't we go next to Diego from California?
Hello.
Hello.
What's going on? I had a question about what do you think about the growth of people being interested in socialism or any sort of a radical kind of socialist ideologies in America?
Okay, before Mr. Pakman weighs in, I will give you my off-the-cuff response. My response would be, capitalism is collapsing, people are noticing, and people like me and other communist Marxists are out there agitating, and we're educating people, and we're trying to get people organized to stand up for themselves, because people are working their asses off, and capitalism is not providing a good life to more and more people with each passing year. Capitalism had a major crisis in 2008, which just could not be passed off as anything else but capitalism itself. The system that chases profits and lives off of the exploitation of labor and nature had a major crisis. They deregulated during the Bill Clinton years, and in pursuit of ever more profit, you also had the George W. Bush and Dick Cheney era wars, the war on terror. There was a massive expansion of imperial aggression. And at the end of those years, you had this huge collapse. Obama threw a Band-Aid on it. Then we got Trump. And it's just people are working and working and working. And they want answers, practical answers in their life to how do we get out of this? How do we end this? And our answer is you can't end this without ending capitalism itself. A more dignified life is possible. A more stable life is possible. And socialism is the way to get to that. And people are just realizing that that is it. Now, there are people who call themselves socialists who really are more social democrats. And I'm sure that Pakman's going to address that because he talked about that. Basically, he, as a liberal, is trying to take credit for some of this interest in socialism, basically saying that, oh, well, a lot of the people who say that they're socialists, really, they like me, not S4A, not people like that. But, well, let's see what he actually says, and we'll take it as it comes.
I don't know. I think it's not surprising that when a system is failing, that it creates a window of opportunity of getting people to jump on board with really different systems. So, like, for example, I would agree with the socialists that our form of capitalism has failed so many people.
So pausing, our form of capitalism, he says, as if there's really any other significantly different form. There is not. I'm sure he's going to go on to promote Scandinavia, which is just a hanger-on at the fringe of imperialism, and, allies of the U.S. and all the murder that it does. Let's just get something straight. The U.S. is at the heart of imperialism today. Imperialism just being capitalism operating on a global scale, affecting other countries violently, just as it once, affected its internal population. At a certain point, capitalism had to go global in order to keep funding itself. Anyway, This is why there's any capitalism left in the world, the US. The US has been against every revolution ever in which people said, hey, we don't want to be exploited and we're standing up for ourselves. You're not going to take our natural resources. You're not going to exploit our labor 14 hours a day in a sweatshop. Every time that people stood up, the US was there to step on their heads. That's the reality. So you want to say there's some other form of capitalism? There fucking isn't. There wouldn't be any capitalism left in the world if it wasn't for the US. And we wouldn't even be having this conversation with this fucking tool, Pakman, whose existence as a defender of capitalism is propped up by the system he mildly criticizes sometimes and says, oh, you know, we could just be a social democracy like Scandinavia. Well, no, we couldn't. First of all, those concessions given out under social democracy, the healthcare and everything, they had to be fought for. And the only reason that the capitalists made those concessions was so that they could hang on to power. That's what we socialists are trying to break. We're trying to break their power. They legally own, and once you have a legal claim to ownership, then you get the courts and the military and the police backing up that claim, that legal claim to property. Well, they legally own industry and everything it produces, whether they did the labor or not. And the working class is thrown crumbs. And then the capitalist class takes all that extra wealth, all that surplus value they extracted from the working class in the form of goods and services at the point of production. They take all that, they use it to consolidate their hold on power, political power. They have the economic power, and then they have the political power. So this is their system. Any concessions that were made so that they would hang on to power. And we have been living in the austerity age now for a while, where it's, quote, shared sacrifice, meaning they're just cracking down on those concessions that they've made. Working people are being asked to do with less. Why did we get this in the first place? The threat of revolutionary socialism is why. Back in the 1900s, we had the IWW, the Wobblies, scaring the shit out of the ruling class. In the 19-teens, more communist agitation and the Russian Revolution, and we had the Red Scare. In the 20s, we had more agitation, a growing labor movement, and the coal wars, shooting wars between workers in Appalachia and the bosses who were trying to throw them off of their land and force them to work in mines. And in the 30s, a faction of the US ruling class, the FDR faction, said, hey, maybe rather than cracking down as much, let's, formalize, systematize some of these concessions and hope that it all blows over. And that has basically been the social democracy approach that Pakman stumps for. The problem is you don't get that without, revolutionary effort, basically. So at best, these people, while shitting on people like us, Marxists, they also, try to spin our energy and, they try to co-opt this. They're capitalists. I mean, this is how they live. They live off of other people's work. So they take our work and our effort as we try to fight for our own interests. And they say, thank you very much. Capitalists are going to stay in power, but we'll give you, a few extra crumbs a week. Well, fuck that. So anyway, our form of capitalism is bullshit. Because no matter what, capitalism has at its heart systematized exploitation of labor for profit. That's definitionally like capital. You can't have capitalism without that. So defending that system in any form is defending exploitation. Why would you do that? Like, there are other options out there. Well, it's probably not in his financial interest to do so. What's David Pakman's class interest? So anyway, let's let him finish his non-answer about, forms of capitalism being significantly different from each other.
But for me, the solution is well-regulated capitalism called social democracy in the Northern European model. But I understand how, if someone is just getting introduced to some of this stuff, whatever seems the most different from what we have will have a certain amount of appeal. So I guess I'd say it's not super surprising that that's what's going on.
Yeah, with the Nordic model, what I found interesting is the role of more radical socialist elements in those countries that helped push for some of the social democratic things like rent controls and other government programs. Do you think that could be achieved here, or what's your opinion on that generally?
Could which part be achieved here? Just having rent controls?
I guess. Do you think a revolutionary, radical, socialist element in the country could serve to bolster social democracy in America, like it did at times in Scandinavia?
So this caller is asking about exactly what I just mentioned. Basically, the efforts of socialists and communists being co-opted by defenders of capitalism. So I don't know if he's trying to show up Pakman and like get him to admit that, you know, socialists and communists are only useful to us insofar as we can co-opt their agitation. But that definitely is what it sounds, or, you know, whether he's suggesting, hey, would it be a good idea to do this? It's indefensible. I mean, any defense of capitalism to me ultimately usually comes down to daddy's got stocks or, you know, just real confusion as to what your interests are. As for the whole Nordic model, here's a meme for you that I think spells it out very well. So in the upper left panel from The Simpsons, you have Lenny and Carl labeled libs, looking at a revolving display of slices of cake. They're labeled libs, and the cake is labeled Nordic economic model. And Lenny's asking, I wonder what makes it turn. And then the bottom panel is Homer turning a very large gear labeled global working class, being whipped by a hooded slave driver labeled capitalism. And then the third upper right panel is Carl saying, who cares? Looking at the Nordic economic model, meaning, hey, we have all this nice stuff. I wonder where it comes from. Who cares? Let's just enjoy it. Well, that's exactly this mindset of David Pakman of like, we can just have social democracy everywhere. Well, can we? No, you can't. That's just, I don't even want to call it utopian. It's just, no, you can't. The wealth of the imperialist world, including Scandinavia, where they divided amongst their own a little bit more equally, is extracted by force from the developing world. That's imperialism. If you're, you know, and I don't even think Pakman bothers to try to make the argument that, oh, the whole world could run on social democracy. No, it can't. The problem here, and I dare him to address this at some point, is when you have a class, capitalist class, tiny minority, who owns and runs almost everything in society at a profit, they have to keep expanding beyond their borders. I mean, there have been, you know, long treatises written on this subject. How do you think you can maintain that on just some kind of like every country around the world just has, you know, this national social democratic thing? When profits decline, what are they going to turn to? What are the bourgeoisie going to turn to? Also, what's going to stop the working class from saying, hey, we're doing the work. Why are you taking all this stuff? Which is what drives socialism generally. People can only accept that for so long. There's a lot of, you know, smoke and mirrors and three-card Monte played by these capitalist defenders to try to get your eyes off of that central question. We do the work. Why do they get the stuff? And eventually, sooner or later, you come back to that. Trying to say the whole world could be like Scandinavia is nonsense. And not because of cultural differences, because usually at some point in here, the racist defenders of capitalism start bringing in, oh, well, you know, some people are too culturally primitive or whatever. No, fuck that. The problem is people don't like being exploited. Therefore, people have a natural aversion to capitalism, except for malignant narcissists who run the system and greedily stuff themselves as soon as they can climb up to a higher rung of that exploitation ladder in the capitalist class. There's your basic problem. But, you know, then again, like I said, I don't know if Pakman even tries to say, oh, the whole world could have it, or just, you know, well, we should still have, you know, first world, quote unquote, that exploits, and a third world, you know, quote unquote, that it tries to develop itself but is exploited. You know, that's fine. But, you know, the first world should be fairer to their, quote, own people. I mean, if that's the position, I don't know. Somebody should challenge him on that. Let's get back to him.
I think so. And I've said before, I had an interview with a streamer who goes by the name Vosh. Some people say Vouch, some people say Vosh. And while he is a socialist and I am not, we were in agreement that right now the Social Democrats and the socialists should really be pushing for very similar socially democratic policies because.
Okay, so Vosh agrees with David Pakman on this. I think we can safely conclude from that it is the incorrect position. Vosh is not a socialist. Vosh gets regularly ripped to shreds by actual socialists, including this channel. If you're interested in that, we have a Vosh playlist, and there are many other channels that debunk and criticize Vosh in detail for just generally being full of shit and often, well, I mean, when I say often, I mean routinely misleading people about socialism, giving them the worst possible takes you could have. And you can see the function of it here because Pakman brings up Vosh like this is some point of like socialist liberal unity, crosses his arms like, gee, you know, I don't make the rules, but Vosh agreed, therefore. So you can see the role of these pseudo-socialists like Vosh in bolstering liberal talking points. Continuing.
If there is to be socialism, it will quite likely go through social democracy. Now, there's a different revolutionary perspective which says, no. There's no need to go through social democracy. You just...
Okay, so jumping in here, Pakman just said, very likely if we're going to get socialism, it will go through social democracy first. I'd love to know what he's basing that on, because every example I'm familiar with did the exact opposite. Socialism came about as the result of capitalist societies falling apart, being torn apart by imperialist wars, and then, you know, basically the old order implodes, and socialists stepped up and still had to fight their way into power, but, you know, took power as the result of a giant catastrophe of capitalism. After World War I, you had a revolution in Russia, and there had been a push for that for a long time. And also following World War I, you had a revolutionary moment in Italy, which they failed to capitalize on and got fascism instead. And on. Usually these come about as the result of upheavals. This is part of the point socialists try to make, is that capitalism's unstable. Capitalism relies on war and poverty and exploitation and instability. And basically, you know, it has these crises every so many years, and we just need to get organized to, you know, seize power during one of these giant crises that are baked into the logic of capitalism. You know, after World War II, all of Eastern Europe, basically, like, you know, war-torn, was rebuilt as some form of socialism. So on, you know, it's when capitalism has these crises, it's not through progressive, you know, progressive meaning increasing amounts of social democratic reforms. I mean, name me an example of that, you know, even in South America, which, you know, in Pakman's video on why he's not a socialist, to him, Venezuela is, quote, too authoritarian. So they don't even like situations like that. I mean, it's like, is he talking about Bolivia? Like, what's he talking about? In any case, it's the exception, not the rule. Socialists don't come to power by and large. You know, if liberals who want to keep you dreaming will tell you what he just told you, but that's ahistorical. Continuing.
It's got to crush capitalism and then put in socialism. Even though I'm not a socialist, to me, the most likely path to socialism is through social democracies.
Yeah. The source on that is, dude, trust me. There's your source.
So, yeah, I agree that right now, social democrats and actual socialists could very much be united on getting to socially democratic policy if and when we get the U.S. to be more like that. At that point, the social democrats and the socialists can fight it out for whether we keep going.
So I don't agree with that, and I have two things to say about it, other than what I just said, which is like he just pulled that out of his ass. That's ahistorical. You know, more and more social democratic reforms is not normally how socialism comes into effect. And why doesn't it? To follow up on that earlier comment. Well, it doesn't come into effect that way because capitalists currently own industry and they have a government they built for themselves. So they own industry and they own the government. This is why Marxist-Leninists say our first step is smash the parasite state. And we build a new one which can administrate socialism, not keep administrating in bourgeois style. So I know that this may be hard to believe, but since they already, point of fact, own all of that stuff, they don't give it up willingly. So that's why you can't just legislate capitalism away. They only grant you those concessions when they think it's going to stabilize their power. Okay? That's why they do it. And if you actually try to come for their power, they get super, super violent. That's what we've seen throughout history. I'm not making that up. That's a proven historical fact. They will come up with every kind of manipulation and violence to try to keep themselves in power, because they are in power now. All they got to do is fight using that power to hang on to it. Whereas we do not have that power and we're trying to gain it. So that's why you can't just legislate in capitalism, because capitalists they don't just say, oh, geez, you elected more people than us and you're going to implement these laws. Well, I guess you won fair and square. Here ends our 300-year reign. Good luck. Here are the keys. We're going to go retire to our underground bunker. That's not how it works. Every time there is a revolution, they immediately start fighting to try to get their shit back, which can last for decades in some cases. Just, this is history. So, okay, that's point, the original point. Now, point one, new point that I'm trying to make on what he just said. There was a time, actually in the recent past, where I thought that maybe as a general strategy for the time being, that this kind of left alliance might work. That is a broad left alliance of social democrats, socialists, communists, maybe anarchists, whatever. But the broader left working together, as in the style of the Bernie Sanders 2015, 2016, and 2019, 2020 presidential campaigns, which saw the U.S. left, including Socialism for All, get a big lift. There was a real moment there, and it definitely did amplify a lot of the conversation and agitation that we were having. I'm no longer really convinced that a movement like that is worth the effort. For as much of a lift as it did give to the discussion, as soon as Bernie Sanders dropped out, they stopped putting him on TV. All of that media coverage went away. All of that amplification stopped. And while it was useful, while it was here, I wonder if now we don't just use the independent mechanisms that we have built and just go from there. Also, look at the way these people have governed. So what are the fruits of those efforts in terms of taking power? Does that sort of, social democratic takeover of the U.S. basically fascist government even work? What does it yield? Well, you got Bernie Sanders, toiling away in the basement of the Joe Biden campaign. Apparently, he just had some big legislation proposed. We'll see. I think he was much better as a messenger in the media, because I think that that's the stage that we're at, not, putting forward bills and doing the work of the Democratic Party for it, which they're just going to sabotage anyway. And then you get people like AOC and the Squad, who I think we're going to do a video on that this weekend too. Just basically, talked a great game, but most of their impact comes down to tweeting, with a couple of exceptions. For example, lifting the ban on new federal housing, where you can't have a net increase in public housing anywhere. So, there have been a few things, but we're talking tiny things around the edges, nowhere near commensurate with either what people want, or what actually needs to be done, just based on material need that is going on right now. So I'm no longer really sure that that is even worth the time and money that people invest into it. We put a lot of time and energy into it. And I think that the best thing that came out of it, honestly, was more of the independent left media and organizations that have cropped up as a result. And I would mention here DSA with a major qualifier. I think that they do some good non-electoral work, and in some areas in this badly fragmented USA, that they're the only thing or the best thing in town. And some of their non-electoral stuff, whether they're fighting for ballot measures in places that allow for that in their local government, or they're doing along those lines some kind of rent control initiative or minimum wage. Like, you'll see DSA involved in that. Those are good things. Like, I don't oppose any of that, okay? But when it gets down to it, they endorse Democrats and they still have terrible foreign policy. There was a big thing on Twitter about that. A lot of this, DSA is not a monolith. There are many actual communists within it, and I see you in there, and that's great. Unfortunately, it looks to me like the organization still has a shit ton of basically imperially minded social democrats who, shit on developing world socialist movements as, authoritarian or this or that. You got to get a handle on that because it's totally poisoning your organization, which again can be the best org in a lot of places. And I want to be able to say to people, oh, you're looking for something to join, start with DSA because there's probably one in your area. And I have seen them do good things. But man, if you don't decouple from the Democratic Party and stop all this like imperialism, boosting in one way or another, that's just not recommendable. And I'd say to anybody who is in that organization, you've got to get on that because, or share info on if you think it can't be done. Anyway, that's for another time. But then point 2 about what Pakman said is in the Russian Revolution, you had a situation very much like that, where there were 3 major factions in the Soviets. So in 1917, in the February of that year, the Tsar was deposed, which created a power vacuum. There was then a provisional government in which bourgeois parties like the Cadet Party were rubbing their hands, thinking about taking power. And then there were the social revolutionaries who were kind of radlibs, and then the Mensheviks who were social democrats, and then the Bolsheviks who were what we would know as communists today. Well, during that year of the provisional government and the jockeying for power in that power vacuum, the Mensheviks and the social revolutionaries wound up siding with the bourgeoisie. So they were ready to replace the Tsar with the capitalists. That's not socialist. So the Bolsheviks were really kind of the only ones left out there saying, no. We fought for workers and we're going to put the working class in power through our party, which actually fights for them, unlike your shit-ass party that is cozying up to the bourgeoisie. That's bullshit. And anyway, Pakman is bullshit, and it's more of the same. History repeats itself because capitalism runs on very simple logic, which is basically identical. The technology changes, but the logic of capitalism, the laws and the property relations do not change. Therefore, technology may evolve, but the property relations don't. In fact, that's what we're trying to do as socialists. We're trying to update the legal and governmental system to actually match the socialized nature of the economy. It's the bourgeoisie that, out of their own selfish personal interests, are trying to keep our system of government back in the 18th century, out of which it originated. We are trying to update it. Socialism is the modern outlook, not all this fucking bending over backwards to, Scandinavia this and whatever. Not that. So anyway, let's finish off this video.
Yeah, I generally agree at this current point with both of the parties being pretty, like the Democrat and Republican parties being pretty rough when it comes to capitalism, and their kind of just unbridled support for it. So it does seem like anyone left of that is kind of left out in the dust,
Yeah, no, I don't. There's a lot of people that are just outside of that 2-party paradigm, and it's not surprising that when something else comes along that's appealed to them, that they would gravitate towards it. No shock at all.
Well, thanks for answering my question. That was cool.
My pleasure. All right, Sir Diego, very much appreciate the call.
Sure.
Okay, so it's over. As a closing thought, I've put the Simpsons meme back up on the page, and let me say this to you. Forget electoral politics. The caller ended by mentioning, the Democrats and the Republicans, and Pakman wrapped it up with that as well. Forget electoral politics on anything but the very local level, which you might have some possibility of breaking through. Although even on the local level, Don't underestimate the influence of, county people and, local wealthy land developers and things like that stepping in and, dropping a lot of money into politics. Also, they know everybody. It's not just the money, but these people have been making connections for decades. Capitalist government is run by and for capitalists. It's really not meant, it doesn't accommodate a socialist outlook well. This is why, as Marxist-Leninists, we start with just smashing the capitalist state, and we don't do it through elections. There's not necessarily an opposition, although some Marxists I've talked to do oppose running in bourgeois elections on the, basically because it can just confuse workers to like, wait, are we endorsing electoralism? Like, what even is the point? And I would say in the US, where the system is so locked up and just sewn up so tight, there really may be no point at all other than just advertising. But even then, people debate the merits of like, well, is the advertising even worth it versus other channels like social media doing outreach there, when we know goddamn well we're not going to get elected. And if we do, you're probably going to get blocked. Again, maybe a local like city council or some kind of thing, you might be able to do something there. So I don't want to completely shit on that. Do what you can do, even if it's just to, demonstrate the futility of doing it. But at some point, we've got to realize, at least those of us who have already come to a series of these realizations, we've got to realize like electoral politics clearly are not the way forward. And you look at how depressed radlibs and social democrats get watching their fucking Democrats and like the people that they put up to, challenge the corporate establishment and all these other, totally transform the Democratic Party. Yeah, that's a recipe for just severe chronic depression. Okay, that's probably how you're going to end up feeling if you get invested in all of that. Just honestly, forget about it. We need to, as I've said many times, the fundamental task of the U.S. left is to completely detach from the Democratic Party as soon as possible, but definitely within the 2020s. You cannot try to be part of a clearly bourgeois party like the Democratic Party. This whole notion that we're going to take it over and transform it, people have been saying that for decades. I thought that Bernie Sanders had a unique, if anyone was going to do it, he had a chance to do it. He did not do it. Reasons for that, have been discussed and considered in other videos on this channel. I thought he had a unique opportunity to do it because there's always somebody, whether it's Kucinich or Wellstone or whoever, there's always somebody who's like left of the usual Democrat and they try to do things differently. And, they're always this like one lone tragic martyr out there. Again, Bernie was not a real Democrat. It just, he was filling stadiums and even he couldn't pull it off. And now we have Biden who, ran on a national mask mandate. And now we have COVID transmission like going crazy. And it's not just because people are unvaccinated. That's why people are ending up in the hospital more, because vaccines reduce your symptoms and reduce your chances of ending up in the hospital. You can still be vaccinated and end up in the hospital. It's part of the why people need to get vaccinated, so we're not needlessly clogging up all the respirators and everything else, ventilators that people need. But masks, they stopped the spread. He ran on that, and it's been nothing. I would never vote Republican because I don't support them. But at this point, I'm starting to feel like the Democrats, and again, all this does is buy us time. So by no means am I necessarily endorsing this strategy. I'm just riffing here. These are just, thoughts as I think about all this stuff. It almost seems to me like the Democrats are better in opposition, air quotes around opposition, but when they're not the leading party in power and they're tasked with opposing the Republicans, I feel like they're almost better in that role versus like this whole task of, people trying to get them elected because they're a little bit more similar to the left. Like, look at what they do once they are in power, whatever. But like I said, forget it just, all of this, at best, you're talking about a very small difference, and we need other solutions. We need them desperately. and they are not going to be had through the electoral system. That's my point, is that it's so absurd, it's so log jammed that you wind up going like, maybe it's better if Democrat, like you started considering all these absurd scenarios because just nothing really works well. So you start just thinking of these like, crazy angled, askew situations. But then you look at the mental gymnastics you're trying to go through to make some sense of like, well, maybe we could get a little 0.5%. And it's like, look, forget the 0.5%, decouple, and, let's do something outside of the system. It has worked before in other countries. But we need to move beyond the fear. We need to move beyond the despair. And we need to embrace solutions that have actually practically worked in other countries. This means Marxism, particularly Marxism-Leninism. So anyway, I'm going to leave it there for this video. Fuck David Pakman as usual. Thanks to you all for listening. Thanks to the current patrons whose names are on the screen for their contributions. If you'd like to get your name on the screen, head to patreon.com/socialismforall. You can sign up for as little as $2 a month. Every donation is materially helpful, as well as just very encouraging on, a morale level. So all of that's appreciated. If a donation is not your thing, understandable. We're in a bad economy. Liking, sharing, subscribing, and commenting helps to get these videos, this channel, in front of more viewers. So we appreciate anything that you can do there, particularly spreading the videos onto Facebook. Very much appreciated, as Facebook really hates S4A and has thrown us off multiple times. We are on Twitter now at Socialism S4A at Twitter. So go and follow us there. And thanks for whatever you do in your community, in your life, for agitating, educating, and organizing for an end to capitalism. And we will catch you in the next video.